a ride that was responsible for deaths on not just one, but two separate occasions. In 2004, 7-year-old Stephanie Duodon managed to get free of her restraints while waiting for the Mind Scrambler to start, a twister ride at the Rye Playland in New York. She knelt on the seat, and as soon as the fast-paced attraction began, she was thrown to her death. 3 years later, a ride worker was also killed when the Mind Scrambler was started accidentally while she was still attending to the passengers. This is why ride attendants must check safety restraints. When 16-year-old Hayley Williams was riding the water roller coaster Hydro in Wales, she suddenly flew out of her car and plunged 100 feet to her death. CCTV footage showed the staff had not checked if her lap restraints were secure. The park was eventually fined $370,000 for negligence, and the ride was redesigned, this time with over-the-shoulder style restraints. You wouldn't have imagined a ride which consisted of firing people from a medieval siege weapon would be a real thing, because, let's face it, it sounds a bit dangerous. Yet that's what the Human Trebuchet at Middlemore Water Park really was. The attraction fired thrill seekers 100 feet away into a tennis court-sized safety net. At least that was the idea. When 19-year-old Oxford University student Konstantin Yankov became a human projectile, he never made it to the net, landing just short and later dying of his internal injuries. As it became one of the first ever wooden racing roller coasters when it was built in 1911, the Derby Racer never had the best safety record. Shortly after it was opened, a man flew out of the coaster and was killed instantly on impact. 6 years later, another man was not only thrown from the car, but into the path of another train, again killing him instantly. It took a third death in 1929 from another passenger unwillingly leaving the coaster at high speeds, before a case was brought against the ride's operators. On September 5, 2003, Disneyland's Big Thunder Mountain Railroad became the last ever ride 22-year-old Marcelo Torres would go on. As the head locomotive entered a tunnel, its axle broke loose and jammed against the brake section, causing it to become airborne and hit the ceiling. It proceeded to fall on the first passenger car, crushing and killing Torres, as well as injuring 10 other passengers. This accident was blamed entirely on the poor maintenance of the ride at the time. Never get too close to a ride in motion. In June 2008, 17-year-old Asia Ferguson lost his hat while riding Batman, the ride roller coaster at Six Flags over Georgie Amusement Park. Afterwards, in order to retrieve his headwear, Ferguson climbed over 2 fences while the coaster was operating. Once on the tracks, it is thought he tried to grab the hanging legs of the passengers in the car above him. This train hit him at 50 miles an hour, and he was decapitated. The event mirrored an incident 6 years earlier, when a groundskeeper was killed after he wandered too close to the coaster and was hit in the head by a rider's leg. When a group of students decided to attempt to break the world record for most riders on a water slide, things went tragically wrong. On 2nd June 1997, 33 pupils from Napa climbed the stairs of the Banzai Pipeline water slide at Waterworld, California, which was then known as Waterworld USA Concord. Despite protests from the guards, one by one they quickly slid down the enclosed pipe, intentionally clogging it. Halfway down, the weight of the students caused the slide to burst open. They fell some 40 feet to the ground, receiving broken bones and other severe injuries. The last person to enter the ride, a 17-year-old girl, was killed after she landed headfirst on the concrete below. The worst recorded roller coaster accident took place at Battersea Fun Fair, London, in 1972. This ancient wooden coaster hadn't been maintained sufficiently for many years, and it was this negligence that led to the tragedy. As the cars were ascending the hill of the first drop, the rope pulling them suddenly snapped. The anti-rollback mechanism that was in place failed to operate. The cars sped backwards and crashed into the boarding area, smashing through a wall and killing 5 children and seriously injuring 13 others. The accident was a major factor in the fair closing down 2 years later. On June 14, 1986, the world's largest indoor triple-loop roller coaster, the Mindbender, was the scene of one of the worst accidents of all time. Missing bolts on the wheel of the last car caused it to completely disengage from the track. It swung about wildly, causing passengers to violently fly out. 3 people were killed from the fall, and when the cars crashed into a concrete pillar, while another man was seriously injured in the neck and chest. The worst ever accident to take place on a theme park ride didn't involve a roller coaster, a Ferris wheel, or any kind of white-knuckle ride. It took place in a haunted house. It was May 11th, 1984, when the haunted castle at Six Flags Great Adventure in New Jersey suddenly burst into flames. About 29 people were in the attraction when the fire started. Most of them escaped, but 8 teenagers were trapped in the house and died of asphyxiation. The majority of the castle was made from highly flammable materials, and the high winds that night, combined with the castle's venting system, meant temperatures reached over 2,000 degrees, melting even the metal support struts. After the fires had abated, the 8 bodies that were found turned out to be so badly burned, they were initially thought to be mannequins used in the house. The teenagers could only be identified from their dental records. The park was brought up on charges of aggravated manslaughter, with prosecutors arguing the lack of sprinklers and smoke detectors led to the loss of lives. In the end, Six Flags was found not guilty of negligence, mainly because the fire was discovered to be most likely an act of arson, a truly evil act for what became a real house of horror.